Erica Carlson is a 150th anniversary professor and professor of physics at Purdue University. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Physics from the California Institute of Technology, as well as a PhD in physics from UCLA. As a theoretical physicist, Erica researches electronic phase transitions in novel materials and has given talks on the intersection of science and Christianity at universities and churches around the world. It's time to worship the Creator. Please welcome Erica Carlson.
How you doing? It's good to be here. One of my favorite childhood memories is sitting up on the roof of our house at night with my dad. He was helping me look for UFOs. I really wanted to find a UFO. And so often he would take me up on the roof. This wasn't really mom approved. And we would just sit up there and stare at the stars. Now, I never found a UFO. I think my dad saw that coming. But while we were up there, he would tell me about the universe and about the solar system and how things worked. And I was filled with awe and wonder over the universe that we live in. And I think a lot of us have an experience like that, an experience of awe and wonder when we encounter nature. And the awe and wonder, if you're a believer, for those of us who are believers, when we encounter that experience with nature that draws us up into awe and wonder, we put that awe on the Creator. It draws our hearts up to worship the Creator. But if you're somebody who doesn't believe that we have a Creator, what do you do with that? When you have the same experiences, maybe it's not the stars or hunting for UFOs for you. Maybe it's the sunset. If you're an early riser, maybe it's the sunrise. Maybe it's a really beautiful plant that you've seen, something like that. Maybe it's just a really good meal, okay? But if you experience that awe and wonder when you encounter nature, but you don't put the awe and wonder on worshiping the Creator, where does it go? So let me tell you where I see it going for my friends and colleagues who are science-minded and don't believe in a Creator. That awe has to go somewhere, and it tends to land on things or people. And so oftentimes, I see my science-minded friends idolizing people or idolizing human intellect in general. And what this leads to, if you idolize human intellect or idolize people, it really leads to dysfunctionality, right? I mean, if my biggest hero in the universe is a person, or if my biggest hero is my own human intellect, that kind of leads to arrogance. It leads to broken relationships, and that can lead to isolation. And also within this worldview that there's not a Creator, there's inherent within it futility. That is, a lack of meaning, a lack of purpose. So what I hope to do with you today is give you some ideas. If you are a believer and you have some science-minded friends who are skeptics, I'd like to give you some ideas for how you can make connections with your science-minded friends and understand them a little bit better and help point them to a Creator. I want to help you build some bridges. If you're the skeptic, I want to give you some ideas about how you can pursue better this really important question of, is it possible that we're created? Is it possible that we have a Creator? It's the greatest question that our curiosity will drive us to. So here's my profile of science types, okay? Myself being one. We love nature. Okay, that goes without saying. It might be that we go hiking or go looking at stars, or it might just be, as happens to me so often, I open up a textbook on quantum mechanics and I say, wow, that is some cool stuff. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. And we are curious people, sometimes curious to a fault. I mean, you can't go on a walk in the woods with me and expect to get somewhere. I am going to be telling you, whoa, look at this cool rock. I just found 6 different types of moss growing on it. And then I'll get another few feet and I'll start talking to you about the mushrooms. So we don't get very far, okay, sometimes. So we're curious people. We are ultimately truth seekers. Science is a method for getting at the truth. And we get there iteratively, and yet we are truth seekers. For me, as a believer talking to a skeptic friend who's science-minded, I consider this one a tremendous ally, right? At our heart, those of us who love science and do science, we're truth seekers. What did Jesus say about himself? He said, I am the truth. And so I see that as an ally in our discussions. We are very much show me type people, okay? As in show me the money, as in show me the evidence for what you're saying. So we're very evidence driven. Sometimes people will wonder if scientists rely on authority. We try as much as possible not to. That's why we go to scientific conferences and ask each other really impertinent questions, okay? It's called the scientific dialogue. And we do not take each other's word for anything. We poke the truth and poke the truth and poke the truth, and then we walk away saying, hey, I don't really believe you. I'm going to go try that experiment in my own lab. I'm going to go try the calculation myself. So we're very much show me the evidence people. We're makers. We love to tinker and build stuff. Does anybody here have a 3D printer? Anybody else? 3D printing junkie? Oh, yeah. So we're on our second 3D printer now because the first one's not enough, obviously. And when we first got the 3D printer, oh, wow, the sense of I can do anything, right? I can make any object that's possible in 3 dimensions. I could make it. I could just make it. It took all my self-control to not quit my job, sell the house, and sit around 3D printing all day because it's fun. Yeah. Now, I'm going to let you in on a little secret, too. Those of us who are science-minded, we secretly want to rule the world, okay? I guess maybe that wasn't a big secret, was it? I see some elbows going. All right, so we want to master the universe. Think of how we talk about it when we understand a subject. We say that we've mastered it. We say that we've mastered that subject. Now, ultimately, when you understand the way the world works, you can use it to control things, and you can actually use it to go back and do great things with it. But we secretly want to rule the world. Yeah, you know there's a great 80s song about that. Okay, now, under this worldview that there's no creator, what's that like, okay? If that's you and you're the skeptic, if that's your skeptic friend, one of the things that we scientists understand within that worldview is that if there's no creator, that is, if the physical world is all there is, and it's just a bunch of particles following physical laws, then the outlook for humanity is actually pretty bleak, okay? We have a couple of things going against us there. One is the heat death of the universe. Ultimately, you've probably heard this before yourself, we're inevitably tending towards the heat death of the universe where everything will run down. There will come a time when our sun, as much as we love it and as big and powerful as it is, will wink out, and then game over, no life in this solar system. You might think, hey, maybe we'll figure out how to get humanity to another solar system by then. I'm skeptical about that myself, but let's just say we did it. That star is just going to burn out eventually. There will come a time when the last star in the universe winks out and game over, no more life. So ultimately, that is a very futile outlook, as in futility, meaninglessness, lack of purpose, for the long-term view of humanity. We've got another major contributor to this sense of futility, that it's ultimately meaningless and purposeless, and that's the idea that there's no freedom. If all there is, if I just view you and me as just a collection of atoms that happen to be in the right space at the right time, and they're just following physical laws and chemical laws and biological laws and so forth, things that follow laws do not have freedom. They must follow the law. That's why we call them laws and not suggestions. Can you imagine if they were suggestions? And half the electrons in your body just decided to go on strike tomorrow. Nah, I don't want to do the Coulomb interaction. You would, well, depending on how it went, you'd probably just become sludge. You might explode. It's not good, okay? All right, we'll just agree on that. So if all we are is just the physical world with physical laws, there's no room for freedom. And yet, we all have this high-level experience. I hope you have it. I walk into an ice cream shop with all those choices in front of me, and I believe that I really do have the ability to make an actual free will decision where I decided I'm going to have chocolate, or double chocolate, or triple chocolate. You sense a theme. You might choose differently, but we all have this impression that we really get to make decisions, okay? And yet, if all there is physics and chemistry and biology and so forth, that's an illusion, okay? Now, you might think, okay, so there's a couple of counter-arguments to this, so let me tell you what they are briefly. You might think, hey, quantum. Anybody think quantum? Okay, so maybe quantum will get us out of this. Maybe we'll find our freedom in the fact that quantum mechanics has a little bit of apparent openness in it. This comes from the idea that the theories that we have for quantum mechanics involve using probabilities, okay? We use the mathematics of probabilities and statistics to make predictions about quantum systems, all right? Now, there's one major thing to be aware of. We actually don't know whether the probabilities are inherent to the physical system. We don't know whether they're real, ontological, a philosopher would say, or whether the probabilities are all in our head. They might just be a calculational tool because we don't know everything about the system, therefore we use the probabilities. We don't know. I hope we'll figure it out eventually. We need experiments to distinguish. We're not there yet. We don't know. So they could just be, the probabilities could be just a reflection of our lack of knowledge, or they could be inherent to the physical system. If they're inherent to the physical system, then maybe there's some openness there, you know? And people think, well, maybe that openness will somehow lead to freedom or free will. Now, the problem with that is that they're random, okay? So think about that. This is worse. This isn't actually leading you toward control and decision-making. This is leading you towards blind chance. Now you're not only controlled by physical laws, but now there's just random chance hitting you from every direction. That's not you in control. That's you having less control. So this doesn't help you. Another thing that people put out that may help us get over this problem, I mean, it is a problem from that worldview. How do you get free will out of physical laws? People sometimes talking about emergence with regard to that. So let me tell you a little bit about what emergence is. First of all, it's within my field, we have a really good handle on it, okay? So I am a condensed matter physicist. Condensed matter is stuff you can touch. If you can hold it in your hand, it's our domain. A star is too large to hold in your hand, yeah? And a single atom is too small to hold in your hand and be able to feel it. So if you can hold it in your hand, it's our domain, it's condensed matter. Within my field of basically the physics of matter and the physics of phase transitions, we have very well-controlled mathematical tools that tell us exactly what emergence means, okay? If you want to look it up, it's called renormalization group. You can look that up. We're not going to get that deep into it today, but let me give you an intuitive understanding of what emergence is like. How many people here have seen a wave? Okay, all right, so everybody picture your favorite wave, all right? Now, some of you are picturing a wave on water, on a pond or on the ocean. Some of you are imagining the fact that the way you're hearing my voice right now is through sound waves propagating through the air. Some of you might have pictured a jump rope or a slinky or something like that having waves on it. Some of you might have thought of the wireless communications that carry electromagnetic waves. Here's what emergence is all about. They're all waves. Doesn't matter what the wave is riding on top of. A wave is a wave is a wave, which is why we always, every time, use the wave equation to describe it. That's an example of emergence. Doesn't matter what it started out in. The large-scale property, something new came out, and it's a wave. Also, you can't get a wave out of a single particle that makes up the system. Think of a wave in a baseball stadium. Okay? You need the whole baseball stadium to participate. Just me by myself in the baseball stadium, I can't do the wave. I can just look like a fool. So that's what we mean by emergence. Now, people have put out the idea, well, maybe we will get free will and freedom out of emergence in the sense of maybe our neural nets, our neural networks, our brain, is large enough and complex enough that free will and consciousness will emerge out of it. The problem with that is that emergence always does exactly what the physical laws say it has to do. If we go back to the example of waves, it's a wave, it's a wave, it's a wave every time. we never get a non-wave out of that system, okay? So it still leads to determinism. You don't get free will. Emergence is not going to save you on this one. You still have the basic problem, okay? And so that leads us back to this sense of futility, all right? So the sense of futility in, if there's not a creator, then not only do we have the heat death of the universe, but we don't know how to get freedom out of that, right? Quantum won't save you, emergence won't save you. Ultimately, it leads to a long-term view of humanity that's futile, without meaning, without purpose. But, if we're created, right? Okay, if we're created, that changes everything, right? That's a game changer. So the first thing I ask my friends is, are you okay with that? Are you okay with the idea that you might not actually have free will? Are you okay with all that futility? If we're created, it changes everything. And the next question I ask is, aren't you curious? Right? Science types are very curious. Aren't you curious? This is the greatest question your curiosity will ever drive you to. Do we have a creator? Now, I think it helps to think in terms of worldview at that point. So let me give you an analogy for thinking about worldview, with a disclaimer that I'm not a philosopher. That's Ken. You already heard from Ken. I like OK Go videos. Any other fans out there with OK Go? So this is a video from OK Go. And in this video, they have a lot of optical illusions where things don't make sense until the camera angle snaps into the right spot. So for example, at the end of the video, and they've done a lot of these throughout the video, you're kind of looking, there's the band, and you're kind of looking, and it doesn't really make sense until the camera angle shifts just a little bit. The camera angle shifts, and all of a sudden, everything clicks into place, and you can see the writing on the wall. A good worldview should be like that. A worldview is not only how you see the world, but it's the window through which you interpret the world. A good worldview should make everything click and make sense. Now, we're lucky in Christianity in that we have scriptures written down for us. So we can say, what should the worldview of Christianity look like as far as God and as far as who he is? So what we find in the Bible is that God created us for love with a plan and a purpose and a destiny. And that the way that he created us, this world in which he created us, reveals his personality. We find a statement many times in Scripture that nature is a source of truth about God. We find many Bible heroes who use an experience with nature to draw them closer to God. Jesus would climb mountains and pray. Moses would climb mountains and fast, etc. So nature, then, is capable of revealing things about God. And I like to make an analogy about this. I really like architecture. I like science and I like art. A nice fusion of those is architecture. And just a few blocks from Purdue, we have a Frank Lloyd Wright house. It's called the Christensen House, and I love to go there. When I go there, I learn things about Frank Lloyd Wright, okay? Now, I've never met Frank in the house. He's not in the house. And yet, when I go into the house and I see what he made, I can learn things about his personality and his preferences and his philosophy. It's the same with the universe that God created. We can learn about him by studying it. So what do we learn? We learn that God is very powerful. As you may know, we have an energy crisis, right? We humans are trying to figure out how are we going to supply enough power for the world, especially with all the developing nations that we want to develop and use more power. We have a few options for how we build power plants, but even if you take all of our power plants combined, they can't shake a stick at the biggest nuclear power plant we have available, which is the sun, right? The sun's our biggest nuclear power plant available, which is why we're so excited about developing solar technologies that can harness all of that tremendous energy coming our way. So that's the kind of nuclear power plant we will never be able to build ever, right? We don't ever even envision being able to start our own star. But God did it, okay? And he didn't just make one. There are about 100 billion stars in our galaxy. There are about 100 billion galaxies in the observable universe. There could be more that we can't see. That's a lot of stars. So he's way more powerful than we are. We also see that he loves us. Honestly, the best way for me to see this is the chocolate ice cream thing. I mean, why does food taste good, right? We could have been built such that we had a drive to eat food, but it didn't actually taste good, okay? Kind of like, you have a drive and you go eat Purina human chow and you're done with it. But food tastes good. Maybe you don't like chocolate. Maybe your thing is more steak or French fries or something like that. But we enjoy food. I think it's evidence that our Creator loves us. He likes us. He likes for us to enjoy the world that he's created. I learned that God is clever, okay? So one of the things I learned from studying the universe around us as a physicist is that God is way cleverer than we are. It is my great privilege to interact with a lot of scientists around the world. I mean, I interact with some really smart, clever people. But here's how I know that the Creator is smarter than us. We're still trying to figure it out, right? So he did it first. We're trying to follow along and understand it. And there's huge problems that we don't know how to solve yet, as in we don't understand. So he's smarter than we are. I learned that the Creator is very creative, all right? And we see this in a lot of different ways. If you are a foodie, maybe you'd like to think about the various types of fruit that are out there. When I go to a different part of the world, I like to go into a grocery store and find the fruit and, I don't even know how I'm going to open this thing. I'm just going to take it back to my hotel room and, maybe I can open it. There's so many different types of things that he's created. Don't even get me started about snowflakes, right? Very, very, very creative. And I see there as well a love of law, right? So when when the particles in the universe follow his laws, there's incredible structure and complexity that can arise out of that. So I see a love of law. I also see invitation, all right? So this one's a little bit more subtle, but a lot of scientists have commented on this. Why is it that we can even figure out the world around us at all? Why is that? Here's the thing. If you and I sat and we thought about, well, what if there were another universe? We don't have the power to do that. We'll never have the power to create a universe. But we can imagine, okay? So let's imagine different worlds, and you and I could come up with the physical laws for those worlds, and we could design universes that were so complicated to figure out the beings living in them would never disentangle at all, okay? Many scientists have commented on why are the laws of this universe such that we can even figure them out, why they're so simple. Okay? It comes down to a separation of energy scales. So for example, you know, if you think of the force of gravity or the force of electricity in a single atom, it's totally dominated by electric interactions. Okay? The force of gravity between an electron and a proton in an atom is 40 orders of magnitude smaller than the electrical interaction there. That's one with 40 zeros out of it. It's that great separation of different pieces of the physics that lets us isolate one at a time and make progress and understand it. Without that, we wouldn't be able to understand. And so I see that as the hand of God inviting us to understand and inviting us into what he's created. So if you're the skeptic, you might be asking this next, well, how can I know? Okay, how can I know? How can I test this stuff? And I hope to give you I hope I've already given you some ideas on places to think about that. But here's something you can try. I would say, have you tried the experiment? Did you know that God invites that? He tells us to test everything and hold on to the good. He tells us, taste and see that the Lord is good. He likes it if we just dive in and see. So let me give you an idea of how that kind of truth-seeking goes for us science-minded types. We like the scientific method, right? The scientific method in a nutshell is basically, number one, have an idea. Number two, test it. Okay, number one, have an idea. Number two, test it. You probably were taught the number one part as a hypothesis. The number two part is test it against real data, meaning you either did an experiment or you made an observation. Okay, astronomers are a good example of an observational science. They don't get to run experiments out there on neutron stars. They observe. But this is an iterative method for getting closer and closer to the truth. And so inspired by that, I like to challenge my skeptic friends to try a spiritual experiment, okay? So here's the basic idea. The idea is that you are spiritual and you have a creator who loves you and wants to have a relationship with you. That's the basic idea. Now, it's a little bit like this. Jesus had this to say about this. He said, if you don't yet know your creator, it's like you're blind, okay? And I think what he was he wasn't talking about our physical eyes. He was talking about spiritual capacity and that we have spiritual senses and we have the ability to sense our God spiritually. So let's take that idea, okay, that you are spiritual and you can know your creator. So here's an experiment that I propose that could get you started trying to answer that, to test that idea. Here's my proposal. Number one, pick a gospel. Any gospel will do, okay? So pick a gospel. That's Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. Those are the four biographies of Jesus. If you're science-minded, you will probably like Luke because Luke is a physician, and so he kind of speaks our language a little bit, all right? So step one is pick a gospel. Step two, read one chapter a day. All right? Don't work ahead. That kind of frustrates science types, so it's okay. So read one chapter. Anybody can do that, right? It's going to take you about 5 or 10 minutes. After you read the chapter, here's where it gets good. Ask God what he wants to show you about what you just read. And, my skeptic friends at this point say, I don't believe in God. This is not going to work. It's okay. You don't have to believe in God to start talking to him, right? You can just say, God, I don't even know if you're there, but if you're there, what do you want to show me about what I just read? And then here's the hardest part. Be silent for 2 minutes and make note of what comes to mind, okay? And then the next day, do the next chapter, okay? The next day, read the next chapter, ask God what he wants to show you about it. You don't even have to believe in him to do that. and then be silent for 2 minutes and take note of what comes to mind. So my prediction is that by the time you get to the end of that gospel using that method, you will encounter your Creator. You will have an experience with a God who loves you. If you want to kick it up a notch, get your Christian friends to pray for you while you're trying the experiment. And if you propose this to a skeptic friend, you better be praying for him. There's one thing I should warn you about. I hope you'll try the experiment. I hope you'll challenge your science-minded friends to test it out this way. There's something you should know. What happens to me when I get to this step here of ask God what he wants to show you and then be silent for 2 minutes, 9 times out of 10, I get this really strong impression that I need to go apologize to my husband. If something like that happens to you, don't be taken aback. Just keep going. All right. Well, I mean, get up and apologize if you're like me and you need to. All right. So this is one way, okay, to help our skeptic friends get started. There are others. And what I hope will happen at the end of that experiment is that you will have had an interaction with a God who loves you, so that now when you see nature and you're drawn up into those feelings of awe and wonder about the world around us, now you know where the awe should go. It goes to the Creator, and that draws our hearts up to worship the Creator. And when we, there, that ends. Okay, so when we worship the Creator, right, rather than living in a worldview that leads to a lack of purpose, that leads to meaninglessness, that leads to futility, instead, we gain purpose, we gain wholeness. He tells us he has a destiny for us. He even tells us, this is really exciting to science-minded friends, okay? He actually tells us he's going to give us a new universe. I can't tell you how exciting that is to scientists, because I love exploring this one, and we love to dream, if there's going to be a new one, like it's in Revelation, it's called a new heaven and a new earth. But if we're going to get a new one, what's it going to be like, right? Is it going to have an extra spatial dimension? Gosh, that'd be so cool. I personally hope we get extra colors. Right now we see 3 dimensions of colors, RGB. That's what your RGB screen is about. I want like 12 more, okay? So this idea of a new universe being given to us is very attractive to our science-minded friends. Also, inherent in this idea of having Creator, inherent in the Christian worldview, is actually it gives us a way to have deep satisfaction as regards ruling the universe. Do you remember when God creates Adam and Eve, what he says to them? He says, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Subdue is a military term for conquer. He's telling them to go out and conquer the world. And then he says, rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and the creatures of the ground. He wants us to have dominion. And I'm telling you, a lot of a lot of physicists were into that dominion thing. So we find that deeply satisfying, okay? The idea that God really did create that desire to rule the universe. He actually created that with a great purpose in mind. It actually puts us in a right relationship with him and helps us worship the Creator. Thanks for your time.